Hey everyone, this is an Aquillo blade update. Since my videos last month, there were so many new discoveries and improvements to my Aquillo designs that the blades that I now use just kind of barely resemble what they looked like in the original videos. So long story short, there are now some new releases that incorporate a bunch of new techniques and innovations into my endgame cryo and quantum blades. And this video is just going to go through what's new and why it's better. And just like caveats, like these blades were already quite optimized, so the changes here is not going to constitute a massive improvement. Performance-wise, we're talking like maybe 5% relative. But they are very clean innovations that makes the builds prettier and cleaner, which I particularly like on Aquillo, where minimalism is very satisfying. So if you're interested in optimizing Megabase builds, this is a short summary of the development last month. So first up is the Cryogenic blade. For the fluid voiding, rather than doing 6 full fluid voiders that we used to have in the front here, we are now doing only 2 fluid voiders here at the back. And that makes the layout a lot neater. And this is a result of something abuc found, is that if you create space platforms to compress the Q1 ice rather than recycling it directly, you get multiple benefits. First, it kind of functions as a dumping ground for ice that makes these recyclers run with less activity, in like similar veins to what we do on Vulcanus, where we are basically making landfill rather than voiding the stone directly, because you get to funnel most of your stuff into a largely inactive machine. And secondly, like this has a secondary benefit here in that it gets to absorb a not insignificant amount of fluid that you were going to have to void anyway, like 800 per craft. So we managed to fit in 2 of these platform makers here, and you can see it is pretty tight. So it is bouncing the platforms through this car, which is on a clock cycle, and the recycling result of that gets basically auto-shunted into this platform machine again, which is then quite busy. This has reduced the entity cost on both recyclers and fluid voiders, which is great, particularly because like the fluid voiders rely on recipe switching, which is not cheap. Then there is a second improvement found by Geist, which I'll be referring to as Fivetech. And this exploits a curious behavior of these ice upcyclers, a tendency to always produce multiples of 5 of any quality. And this is something we can actually exploit by setting stack size to a multiple of 5, 15 on the Q2 and 15 on the Q1. And the result of that is that this machine gets to run a lot more smoothly with less stops. And so you get more out of it, even with less beaconing. And that's great, because like all of my personal benchmarks in isolation here showed that the more you beacon these ice upcyclers, the worse performance you got. And like obviously I suspect that this is partly because you have to void more Q1 as the quality percent decreases, but like this effect persists even to a surprisingly low production number. Like I'm able to get this all the way down to 108 now, down from only 114 in the previous version. But yeah, definitely still an improvement. And yeah, you can even rely on this for the Q3 Plus, and this is taking like multiple qualities, but it's a stack inserter at multiples of 5. Like that's how reliable this multiple of 5 is. Some consequences of these changes is that we can no longer have the train wagon here to direct insert ice between these 2 cryos. And that's because this platform maker here needs the 4th beacon to not output block Q1 ice, because this wing is handling so much ice when this thing is actually churning out ice platforms. So this is now a requirement. But the 15 beacon variant, which I did briefly mention in the previous video, performed basically the same. It was within 1%, but what I didn't account for when I was talking about the performance of that is that it has extra production. And so what you can actually do is you can take out 2 machines every 2 blades, and that makes up the cost that I thought was there. And this is partly due to hibernation, because you can hibernate this blade for a little bit if you're overproducing, or if you stop research cryo entirely. And that's like the ideal case for hibernation. You stop researching, the blade should shut down. And that's the easy case. The problematic case is if you are just barely overproducing, how can you safely actually hibernate the blade? Because these silos are not pulled from at the same rate. Like you can see, suddenly this guy got pulled from, right? This is probably because the cryo ship is kind of full, so leftover launches takes from a few of them. Actually, no, this was launch system. But yeah, sometimes it's not completely even, and so you end up with slightly uneven things in these cars. So you can't just stop when one of these cars is full. You have to basically account for a potential unevenness. And the way you do this is you basically wait 20 seconds after one car is full. And this is basically a measurement setup that I have on this car. Measures what's going in minus what's going out. Basically read hand content, memory cell, subtract. And so this circuit here basically tells you exactly how much is in this car. But yeah, that works best when you actually want to shut it down permanently. It doesn't really work very well when you have a 20-second gap. And a 20-second gap is pretty much what you have when you overproduce by this much. So it's better to just take out two cryos every two blades. Then in the front here, we have cleaned up a little bit. There's the fluoro, which has a little more heavier beaconing, which now is latched. And overall, it just looks a lot more symmetrical now with all the fluid voiding out of the way. We've got to upgrade the lithium to a 15 beacon variant. We're centralized the clocks a little better, sending that down through a central wire, which you can do yourself. Just take them out of any copies and send down the signals as you need. And a final dumb UPS optimization is that all of these silos have been upgraded to legendary, which you might not like, but this actually matters, not in like any real way, because obviously these silos are limited by their animation speed in terms of how fast they can actually launch something, but a higher crafting speed does mean the silo spends less activity time in crafting, and that actually amounts to over a full % in benchmarks, which, you know, makes sense. Like the blade sits here launching rockets for like half of the time. So test setup, again, very similar to last time. 12 belt output, so 6 of my blades here. As I was saying, you don't need the last one, and it's better to not overproduce, so I've cut a little bit so that they can run full blast rather than half-assed hibernation. So that's my setup. I also have a fusion reactor to try and account for some heat pipe buys, which I'll get into. And otherwise, it's the same as the ship that is pulling a precise 12 belt on the top, stopping if it needs to. But at this point, all of the blades we're testing are producing a perfect multiple of belts. So the other ones, and that's kind of the interesting thing here, is abuc, which made his really good improvements here with the platform voiding. He has a really cool car clock here, and he's running the cryos slightly heavier than I am, but he ends up with 6 cryos for 14 machines, I believe. Yeah, 14. So it's not too dissimilar from mine 2-to-1 ratio, and they end up being very similarly performant, but they're a smaller setup. I only produce 1 belt of output each. Some fairness modifications that I do, because like there's so little differences at this scale, to put fluoro here to make this kind of fair, because mine was producing fluoro, this wasn't. And then there's Geist's one, which also I had to make a similar fairness thing too. Like I had to avoid some fluid for him, because all of us were doing that. I also upgraded his silos to Q5, because even that makes a difference at this late scale here. His blades are absolutely enormous, by the way. They're doing 3 belts each, and so as a result they have like 3 of these lithium stars here at the front, and an absolutely enormous amount of ice upcycling at the back, which I guess helps out to balance it a bit. It's very smooth output. So I really like this, but it's also like multiple of 3, and then this is kind of the thing that I think is interesting here, in that all of these 3 blades that I showed you here are very similarly performance-wise. The thing that makes them different is more the high-level choices, how many belts we're targeting. That's kind of what makes the difference here, and like how heavy a beaconing you end up going for. Both me and Guys went for the 15. abuc slightly lower, and that turns out not to be like the biggest deal at all. So it's more like how many belts would you like to do, because like this is obviously that's plumbing work, but it's multiples of 3 is also harder to scale in the future. Now, as for the actual data that I got out of benchmarking with these 3 files that I just showed you, was more or less this. This is abuc's baseline, the V1, the unoptimized one that I tested against before. This is this new one, which is really good. This is Geist one, also really good. This is my previous one, which is 5% worse. That's like, this is very little differences here. That's the caveat. But also, this is also a slightly misleading benchmark, because I've done a lot of heat pipe calculations or optimizations and tried to reduce those as much as possible. Like I'm doing sushi belting of all the rocket parts here, and that saves a significant amount of heat pipes, and that reduces the amount of heat pipe calculations. And you think that's quite important, because you look at the benchmarks here and see this number has gone down quite a bit, so this must account for a significant portion of the improvement. And in a sense it does, but it's also a lie, because when you look at the, let's see, time info here, and we look at how heat pipes is actually calculated, it sits here in this graph on the game update. Electric heat fluid circuit, all of this is done together in a multi-threaded way. So you can see this number, 0.295, it's dominated by electric network, because that's the thing that takes the longest time, and these things are kind of running presumably in parallel, because like, it's clearly not additive, this number here. So like presumably in the game code these things can be calculated independently, and so the thing that takes the longest is the thing you actually need to optimize for. Now in benchmarks, electric network turns out to be almost 0, because you're only testing a single planet, presumably. Whereas in the game, you can see my electric network is massive compared to anything else. Like my heat network used to be twice this, because I reduced this to like a ludicrously small number of heat pipes, to 6,500. You started with like 12,000, because I thought it made a huge difference, and it doesn't. So that's great. And it's like a thing I even tried to compensate for in the editor by like putting a big nuclear reactor there to try and skew it away from heat pipes, which is not that important. And like the reason, like clearly you are reducing this number, so you are making your CPU do less computations, but because this is the number that the game loop actually ends up spending, this isn't making any difference on that unless you have like a very small amount of cores. So effectively what you're doing power optimization. And like for the average factorio megabaser, that's probably not what you're optimizing for. Now, moving on over to Quantum's, because Quantum's got an update almost immediately, like the same day I made a video with a 9 beacon setup here for these this Quantum EM. Geist found a way to max beacon it if you run multiple separated heat networks and run the rocket fuel belt in line here, and like shifting all of these beacons around and making it slightly wider so you can get the maximum range on these inserters in this car. And it just barely works. And then I saw that as an opportunity to, well, we have this belt here now. We can also run all of the rocket parts on here if we do full sushi. So I'm sushing in the rocket parts here. This is a slightly different sushi setup than what I'm doing in the blade. Doesn't rely on Q4 inserters. This is basically pulsing using this segment here as a latch and pulsing in every now and then whenever this segment here is not empty. And then there's a backstop here to kind of ensure that the belt doesn't recirculate too often, because the recirculation comes here, only taking the top part, which is the rocket parts. So that ends up working pretty nicely. The belt doesn't move too long, and none of the inserters none of the silers are ever lacking in components. And I just think it looks super cool with all of these like silos floating out here in the ocean of liquid ammonia. And there's only like 900 heat pipes in total here now, so it looks super cool. And of course this has higher production because of the 12 beaconing, so it's actually up to 5,400 quantums per minute now with this blade. I'm sticking with the 9 EM setup because that works perfectly with my ships. Abuc has one that is slightly longer, but it's suited to his ships. You can basically just extend them, as I was saying, but this is the longest that you can make them while running them on a single cryo. Other than that, you have to pipe in cold fluor or do something else with it. So I think this is a kind of nice multiple. Other than that, like obviously I don't need the extra production, but it does mean that if I look at the production graph now, I get these couple of minutes of full inactivity cycles whenever all the buffers are full. And finally, there's the clocking setup here, because Abuc made this absolutely crazy clock for this quadrant here, just on cue. He has a clock generator thing here, I believe, but he has then kind of split it. So like the top half of the quantum output goes to the inserter that goes into this car, and the other half goes into this, so it kind of cycles every 1,000 ticks. It goes to this car, and then it's going to go to this car after a while. So it ends up being really nice, and just look at the way all of these kind of are in sync, and at the end they will all bam, you know, that's such a smooth clock for all of this. Now, there is one downside to this type of clock, and then that it can technically desync. So I run into this, of course, because I run into all the error cases. So I built a small little system to try and catch this. I basically now have a belt read on this, and this belt here, and I detect if any of them are dropping below, so basically a back pressure detection. And if that ever happens, I just like stop the blade for a little bit, and that fixes the issue permanently. Like you're never gonna actually get this desynced now. So that is basically the big improvements post the updated blueprints of the V9 quantum blade, which is this, and the V9 twin blade, which is basically this. There's no order dependence on anything. We'll include the clocks in there. I might include the fuel blade too. This is the thing I've upgraded to handle a bigger scale than what I technically have. Like I love how minimal you can make Aquillo. You can do everything with just one machine. This is like a single ammonia that is doing 8,000 ammonia per second, which actually kind of hard to do because you really gotta latch it in a particular way so that none of these ice inserters are ever throttled because the fluid is throttled. So there's like very fun little fluid optimizations you can do on this planet. It's also so little actually going on outside of the main blades. So yeah, that's all I have for today. I don't have any nuclear reactors to be driving into this time around, so I guess take care. Oh, and see you in 850 hours.